The salvage auction was being held in a dingy warehouse on Port Meridian's industrial ring. Jake Matthews stood among the other bidders, mostly small-time operators like himself, looking for cheap ships to strip for parts. The auctioneer's voice droned through lot descriptions. Next item, Velrani cargo vessel, registration number V7443, impounded 6 months ago after being found abandoned in Sector 12. No owner claims filed, classified as derelict, starting bid 300 credits. Jake studied the specs displayed on the auction screen. The ship was old, systems outdated, hull integrity questionable. But the parts might be worth something. Velrani's ships used components that were still compatible with current models. 500, Jake called out. No other bids. The ship was too much trouble for most salvagers. Too big to process quickly. Too old to have valuable systems. Too far out in the impound yards to be convenient. Sold to bidder 47 for 500 credits. Jake transferred the credits, received the ownership codes, and headed to the impound yards. The ship looked even worse in person, hull scarred, engines cold, everything about it screaming abandon and forget. He suited up and boarded through the main airlock. Emergency lighting flickered on as his presence registered. The ship still had some power at least. Jake moved through the cargo bays, scanning for anything valuable. Most were empty, stripped clean before the ship was abandoned. Then his scanner pinged. Faint power signature coming from a sealed chamber near the engine section. Jake checked the ship's manifest. Nothing listed for that compartment. It should be empty storage. The door had been welded shut from the outside. Someone had deliberately sealed it. Jake pulled cutting tools from his kit and began working on the welds. It took 20 minutes to cut through. When the door finally opened, he found a chamber that wasn't empty at all. A stasis pod sat in the center, medical-grade equipment, expensive, the kind used for critical patients or long-term suspension. The viewing panel showed a Velrani woman inside, unconscious, the pod systems keeping her alive. Jake's scanner showed the pod's status: life support failing, critical systems damaged, patient survival probability declining. But the damage wasn't random. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the systems to make them fail slowly over months. The woman had maybe days left before the pod failed completely. Jake looked at her through the viewing panel, unconscious, vulnerable, abandoned like the ship she'd been hidden in. Someone had wanted her to disappear, to die slowly in stasis while the ship sat in an impound yard forgotten. He could walk away, seal the chamber, strip the ship for parts, never mention what he found. Whatever conspiracy had put her here, it wasn't his problem. Jake looked at the woman again and made his choice. He started emergency revival procedures. The revival process was dangerous. The pod systems were damaged, making controlled awakening difficult. But Jake had been a military medic before becoming a salvager. He knew enough to be careful, to monitor her vitals, to adjust the protocol when systems failed. It took 6 hours. Finally, her eyes opened. She was immediately defensive, tried to sit up, got tangled in the pod's medical connections, looked around with confusion and rising panic. "Easy," Jake said, hands visible and non-threatening. "You're safe. You were in stasis. I'm bringing you out carefully." "Who, where?" Her voice was raw from disuse. "My name's Jake Matthews. I bought this ship at salvage auction. Found you sealed in this chamber. The pod was failing. I'm trying to help." She studied him, clearly trying to assess threat level while her mind struggled with stasis disorientation. "How long? How long were you in stasis?" "The pod's logs show 6 months. 6, she closed her eyes. "They actually did it. They disappeared me." Over the next hour, as Jake helped her recover enough to sit up and drink water, she told him what happened. Her name was Kira. She'd been a senior intelligence analyst for the Velrani government, working on defense procurement oversight. Her job was to ensure defense contractors were delivering what they promised, that equipment met safety standards, that taxpayer money was being spent appropriately. Instead, she discovered massive fraud. Defense contractors bribing officials to approve faulty equipment. Safety reports being falsified. Billions being stolen while colonies went without proper support. People had died because of the fraud, equipment failures that were actually cover-ups for substandard materials. I tried to report it through proper channels, Kira said, her voice bitter. Went to my supervisors, to internal affairs, to oversight committees. Everyone told me to drop it, that I was misunderstanding the situation, that I should focus on other assignments. But when she refused to drop it, she was labeled mentally unstable, recommended for psychiatric evaluation. When she went to the appointment, they sedated her. I woke up in this pod. Heard voices talking about how the ship would be abandoned in a remote sector, how the pod would fail slowly over months, how it would look like equipment malfunction. Clean, deniable, permanent. Then they put me back under. Jake felt cold. They were going to let you die in stasis. They were erasing me, making me disappear without officially killing me. No trial, no charges, just gone. And when someone eventually found the ship and the failed pod, I'd just be an unfortunate victim of equipment malfunction. No investigation needed. The pod has a failsafe beacon, Jake said, understanding hitting him. When I opened it, the beacon activated, alerting whoever arranged this that I'm still alive and someone's found me. Kira met his eyes. You need to leave, right now. Seal me back in the chamber, walk away, pretend you never found me. When they come, I'll tell them you didn't know. No, you don't understand what you're up against. This goes to the highest levels of government and private industry. They have resources, connections, and the motivation to ensure I never testify. If you help me, you become a target too. Then I become a target. Jake stood. I'm not sealing you back in that pod to die. We'll figure something out. Why, you don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I know you're a person who tried to do the right thing and got erased for it. That's enough. Kira looked at him for a long moment. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Can you walk? I think so. Stasis recovery usually takes a few days, but adrenaline is helping. Good, because we need to get this ship ready to move. They'll be coming, and I'd rather not be here when they arrive. Over the next 3 days, Jake and Kira worked frantically to make the ship space-worthy. It was a mess, systems offline, engines barely functional, life support held together with improvised repairs. But Jake had spent years making junk work, and Kira proved surprisingly capable at following his instructions despite her weakened state. On the 4th day, they arrived. Jake's proximity alarms showed 3 ships dropping out of FTL near the impound yard, corporate security vessels, heavily armed despite being technically private contractors. The lead ship transmitted, "Attention Vessel V-7443. You are harboring a fugitive from psychiatric care. Power down and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be met with force authorized under interstellar fugitive recovery statutes." Jake checked the transmission codes. These aren't legitimate law enforcement. No, Kira said, watching the tactical display. But notice how the actual port security ships are deferring to them. That's how deep the corruption goes. Official authorities step aside for corporate security because someone told them to. We can't fight 3 armed ships. We don't fight, we run. The ship's engines were barely functional, but Jake had managed to get them operational enough for basic maneuvering. He pushed them to maximum, heading for the system's edge where they could jump to FTL. The corporate security ships pursued. Weapons fire, warning shots at first, then actual attempts to disable their engines. They're trying to cripple us without destroying the ship, Kira observed. They need to take me alive to ensure I can't testify. Can you man the defensive systems? I need to focus on navigation. I can try. Kira proved she wasn't just an analyst. She handled the ship's defensive systems with the competence of someone who'd trained for combat situations. She managed countermeasures that confused the pursuing ship's targeting, bought them precious seconds. Jake pushed the failing engines beyond their safe limits. The ship shuddered, alarms screaming warnings, but they reached the FTL jump point. They jumped. In the relative safety of FTL travel, they assessed damage. The ship had taken multiple hits. Life support was failing. Engines were critically damaged. They had maybe one more jump before the ship stopped functioning entirely. "We can't run forever," Jake said, staring at the damage reports. "No, but we don't need forever. We need long enough to change the equation." Kira pulled up a navigation chart. "I still have the evidence. Encrypted files backed up to a secure dead drop before I was disappeared. If we can retrieve those files and get them to independent media or neutral authorities, we can expose the corruption and make you too visible to quietly eliminate." "Exactly. They're hunting me because they think they can disappear me again, cover it up. But if the evidence goes public, if investigations get launched, I become untouchable. Killing me would just confirm everything." Jake studied the navigation chart. "Where's the dead drop?" "Nexus Station. Neutral territory, independent media presence, far enough from Velrani space that official pressure is limited." "That's 3 jumps away, and we have maybe 1 jump left in this ship before it stops functioning. Then we make it to somewhere we can get another ship. We improvise, we survive." Kira looked at him directly. "I understand if you want to leave. You've already risked more than anyone should for a stranger. I can." "Stop, I'm not abandoning you. We'll figure it out." "Why, you still haven't answered that. Why risk everything for me?" "Because walking away means they win. Means corruption and murder get covered up. Means people who try to do the right thing get erased." Jake met her eyes. "I bought this ship expecting scrap parts. I found a person worth saving instead. That's not a mistake. It's the best thing I've found in years." They made it to Nexus Station through a combination of luck, Jake's improvised repairs, and Kira's strategic thinking. They ditched the failing cargo ship, used Jake's remaining credits to purchase basic supplies and passage on a transport heading toward the station. They were pursued. Corporate security had tracked them, but on Nexus Station's neutral territory, they couldn't operate as openly. It became a game of staying ahead, staying hidden, while working toward the dead drop. During the tense days of evasion and planning, Jake and Kira developed genuine partnership. He admired her courage. She'd refused to stay silent despite knowing it could destroy her, and even now, weakened from stasis and hunted, she pressed forward. She appreciated his loyalty. He could have walked away at any point, could have turned her over to save himself, but he chose to help despite the cost. Late one night, hiding in a maintenance section while corporate security searched the station, Kira said quietly, "Thank you for believing me, for helping me, for foreseeing me as worth saving. You are worth saving. Anyone who'd risk everything to expose corruption, who'd fight even when the system turned against them. That's exactly the kind of person worth helping. I thought I was going to die in that pod. Alone, forgotten. The last thing I remembered before you woke me was resignation, accepting that I'd lost, that they'd won. They haven't won, not yet." They retrieved the evidence 2 days later. A tense operation involving Kira accessing the dead drop, while Jake ran interference against security forces who tracked their location. They barely escaped, but they got the encrypted files. From a secured terminal, they transmitted simultaneously to multiple independent media organizations, interstellar oversight bodies, and neutral government authorities. The evidence was comprehensive. Detailed documentation of the fraud, recordings of bribes, communications showing the conspiracy to eliminate Kira, names of officials involved. The story exploded within hours. Media coverage across multiple systems, investigations launched, arrests made. The defense contractors at the center of the scandal faced prosecution. Government officials resigned or were charged. The conspiracy unraveled in spectacular public fashion, but victory came with cost. Kira couldn't return to her old life. Too many enemies who'd escaped prosecution. Too much danger from those seeking revenge. Her career, her home, everything she'd built, gone. Jake's salvage business was destroyed. He was too high profile now, too connected to a major scandal. No one wanted to hire the salvager who'd exposed government corruption. They were both starting over. 6 months later, Jake and Kira sat in their small ship, purchased with the reward money from the investigation, reviewing a case file. Someone had contacted them, asking for help finding a missing person who'd disappeared under suspicious circumstances. "Reminds you of anything?" Jake asked. "Yeah, powerful people making inconvenient people disappear." Kira studied the file. "We should help." "Agreed. Though I should point out we're not exactly equipped to be investigators. We're equipped with experience, knowledge of how these conspiracies work, and the motivation to help people the system has abandoned." Kira smiled slightly. "Besides, you found me when I'd been disappeared. You're better at this than you think." Their relationship had evolved over the months, not just partners in their new mission to help the disappeared and discarded, but genuinely close. The foundation of trust built during those desperate days of running and fighting had grown into something deeper. "I bought a ship for 500 credits, Jake reflected. "Best investment I ever made." "You bought a ship," Kira corrected. "You found a person, there's a difference." "Is there? I was looking for salvage, I found you." "Turns out you were the valuable thing all along." "We were both salvage in a way. You'd been drifting, doing a job that paid bills but didn't mean anything. I'd been erased, disappeared, written off. We salvaged each other." Jake thought about the person he'd been 6 months ago, competent but aimless, surviving but not really living. And Kira, sealed in a failing stasis pod, erased by people who thought one analyst's life was acceptable collateral damage for their profit. "You know," he said, "most people would say opening that pod was reckless, that I should have walked away, let the situation resolve itself without getting involved. Most people would be wrong. You saved my life. And in the process, we exposed corruption that was killing people. We made a difference. We also lost our old lives. We gained new ones, better ones, built on actually meaning something rather than just existing." Kira pulled up the case file again. "So, ready to help find another person who needs saving?" "Always." They'd started as strangers. Jake looking for scrap parts, Kira left to die in an abandoned ship. A chance discovery that could have been ignored but wasn't. That choice had cost them everything they'd built before, but it had given them something more valuable: purpose, partnership, and proof that sometimes the most important discoveries weren't the ones you were looking for. The human who bought a spaceship expecting salvage had found a person worth